Hello everyone, my name is Alexandra McGuigan and I am the Global Development Director for 100 Women in Finance. On behalf of 100 Women in Finance and OMFIF, everyone to this International Women's Day event, Choose to Challenge Role Models. We have 100 Women in Finance members and OMFIF clients and guests joining from around the world. This session came about during a simple conversation between Tamara Singh and me, as we deliberated on why women are always seen as competition when in fact we can be each other's greatest allies. Our event today together is to demonstrate solidarity and that we are stronger together than we are apart. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. There's a Q&A function located at the bottom of everyone's screen. You can submit any questions throughout the session. As we're having multiple fireside chats, please submit your questions as you think of them so we can make sure that the moderator has the chance, the interviewer has the chance to ask them during the session, or you might miss out. We will also be having a poll at the beginning and the end of the session, so please remember to vote. This session is being recorded and the recording will be posted on Community, 100 Women in Finance's platform for members, which can be accessed via 100 Women in Finance's website and also on the OMFIF website in the coming days. Now, I will hand over to the Head of Asia Pacific for OMFIF, Tamara Singh, who will be our moderator for today.
Thanks, Alex, and thank you very much to everyone who's dialed in first thing in the morning this Women's Day. I have a slightly disappointing statistic behind me in my odd backdrop here. It is the statistic that is the finding from OMFIF's Gender Balance Index this year, where we found that fewer than 1% of leading global financial institutions have actually achieved gender balance. I found that a little bit disappointing, but as Alex said earlier, women here, we come together, we're allies for ourselves, and we help make changes we want to see. I'm very happy to have with us today 4 excellent role models to share with us their experiences. That 1% statistic reflects the fact that only 71 global financial institutions are headed by women. 56 have no women at all on their executive teams. And so I think it's fair to say that we're privileged to have with us women with that experience today to share with us their journeys and how they see themselves behaving as role models and what they see for the future. These women will be interviewed by upcoming leaders or existing leaders, and we're hoping to have a very authentic, natural conversation where people ask questions that haven't often been heard. To kick us off though, we're going to have Her Excellency Cara Owen, British High Commissioner to Singapore. Cara herself is a role model to me, certainly. We first met a year ago at the Gender Balance Index launch last year, where she told me the stories of the role models she had had in life, and that really inspired our concept for today. So Cara, could I invite you to turn on your camera and share your views?
Thank you so much, Tamara, for that really kind introduction. And I'm so pleased to be here today with all of you, with a bunch of really impressive role models and women and men who are determined to make sure that we can advance gender equality as much as possible. I really agreed with what Alexandra said, that one of the greatest changes within my own career is the fact that women have increasingly been seen as and acted out as each other's own best supporters and best opportunity makers, and that has been a real pleasure for me. So today we're not only going to celebrate the contribution that women make across all parts of society, but we're also going to seek to further energise our collective efforts and take stock of the progress we're making towards true gender equality at home, at work and across the world. And it's a good time to be doing it here in Singapore, given the conversation that's going on in the background prompted by the government about gender here. I'm really delighted to be here again speaking at this OMFIF and 100 Women in Finance event on a theme very close to my own heart, Choose to Challenge Role Models. Both OMFIF and 100 Women in Finance have made and continue to make a real impact in the finance industry. I applaud them both for their efforts and for the mountains that they are moving. Only through identifying issues really clearly and having open and honest conversations on the back of those, challenging norms, profiling female role models, and having a real concerted efforts by organisations and their employees themselves to drive change from within, will the financial services industry have any hope of achieving true gender parity, enabling women to gain their rightful voice in decision making. Events like this are important in opening up conversations to tackle some of the norms that hold women back across the different spheres. By now, there's no shortage of research to back the importance of gender inclusive practices and workforces. Gender parity in the workforce is not just the right thing to do, but I think we all know that it makes real economic sense as well. McKinsey estimate that up to $28 trillion, or 26%, could be added to global GDP by 2025 by closing the representation gap between men and women in the economy. As COVID continues to pose a real threat to growth in the global economy, there's never been a more pressing time to build back better. Businesses that ignore this are being left behind. Companies with high gender diversity are 15% more likely to have financial returns above their industry medians. Companies with at least 30% women executives outperform those with lower female representation. Venture and private equity funds with greater gender balanced teams have 20% higher return than their peers. No shareholders can sneer at those outcomes. Companies with strong gender values are finding it increasingly are finding it increasingly difficult to recruit the best talent from an increasingly values-driven workforce. There are reputational risks and potentially even regulatory risks to ignoring the gender dimension to business operations. Mitigating those risks starts with identifying the extent of the existing gap. And OMFIF's Gender Balance Index is one of the most comprehensive and authoritative sources for understanding the size of that gap in the financial services industry. Impressively, it covers a database of almost 9,000 individuals across 500 institutions. Today is the launch of the 2021 index, and I highly encourage all of you to read it. I'm really fortunate to have had early sight of some of the key findings, which are both eye-opening and at times disheartening. I wanted to offer 3 reflections. Firstly, even though there has been some really good recent progress, the index highlights how big the gulf remains between men and women in C-suite leadership positions in financial services. The following statistics were particularly striking to me. Out of the 31 central bank governors appointed last year, only 1 was a woman, Vietnam's Nguyen Thi Hung. Only 1 in 10 sovereign fund CEOs are women. Only 18% of pension fund CEOs are women. Only 3 out of the 50 commercial banks surveyed were headed by women at the time of data collection. Commercial banks, central banks, sovereign funds and pension funds all score less than 30%, where 100% would represent perfect gender balance. It's clear that financial institutions still have a long way to go to achieve gender equality at the top. I really hope the findings act as a wake-up call for the industry, compelling financial companies and institutions to take more concrete action to tackle gender imbalance head-on and encourage more women to move up the ranks. Secondly, the index gives us important insights into the pipeline of potential women for C-suite level executive roles. The index assesses over 700 individuals sitting on the executive committees in major banks. Usually, this is the pool of individuals from whom future chairs will be selected. And while the index shows better female participation at exco level, more detailed decomposition highlights imbalances. In particular, female participation on these executive committees is heavily skewed towards the administrative, human resources and operational roles. But it seems like functions like consumer banking are where future leaders are most likely to be selected from. And in those, men continue to dominate. Thirdly, the index highlights discrepancies across geographies. On aggregate, Europe and North America tend to do better than Asia-Pacific financial institutions. That's why, in my capacity as High Commissioner here, my team and I are focused on promoting gender inclusion in our own organisation, as well as throughout the wider APAC region. For example, we host an annual reception to coincide with the Women of the Future Southeast Asia Awards, which spotlights emerging female talent from across the region in many sectors and categories, including business, law, medicine, education, and tech. We've committed to a gender pledge alongside other missions in the diplomatic community in Singapore, committing to take efforts to ensure diversity in panels and equal allocation of speaking time and roles between men and women. I take inspiration from other diplomatic missions and other foreign services. For example, the German Foreign Ministry maintains a database of really impressive female speakers and require that all events have at least 1/3 female participation. We have our own diversity and inclusion charter at the British High Commission to ensure we're holding ourselves to account across all areas of our work, from recruitment practices and workplace cultures on how we run events and removing gendered language in our communications. We also do a lot with young people. We organised a girls' takeover with the Canadian High Commission last year, and were joined by some inspiring female CEOs from different sectors here in Singapore. I had 2 girls take over my role as High Commissioner for the day. We exposed these girls to jobs and sectors that they had never before considered, expanding their horizons and sending a powerful message that girls can be anything they inspire to be. More broadly, in my home ministry, we are striving to set an example for others to follow. 50% of our board members are women. Our previous permanent secretary, Sir Simon MacDonald, established what originally I thought might be just a gimmicky approach, but in hindsight, I think it has really driven our understanding of what can be inside our organisations. He organised the Mirror Challenge in the London headquarters. Every senior female in post had a picture of themselves in a corridor, very prominently displayed in our organisation. And for every senior post that had never been filled by a woman, and at the time he started this, there was a lot, there was a mirror. And the point was that people could walk past this wall and look at themselves with the job title underneath and imagine that we wanted them to think of themselves as getting this role. Now nearly 1/3 of British ambassadors, heads of mission and governors are women, including some of our most strategic posts in the world. Our ambassador to Washington, our ambassador to the new UN, our ambassador to Germany, soon our ambassador to Paris, our ambassador to Beijing, to Moscow, to Canada, all of them, all of them are women, and all of them are doing it for the first time as women. In the financial services space specifically, the UK has launched the Women in Finance Charter 5 years ago. It commits firms to support the progression of women into senior roles in financial services sector, focusing on the executive pipeline and the mid-tier level. It recognises the diversity of the sector and that firms will have different starting points. Each firm should therefore set its own targets and implement the right strategy for their own organisation. It requires firms to publicly report on progress to deliver against these internal targets to support the transparency and accountability needed to drive change. Over 330 firms of all shapes and sizes across financial services have signed up, from global banks to credit unions, the largest insurance companies to the smallest fintech startups, with headquarters in the UK, USA, Europe, and Asia. Many of the challenges and gaps that the index identifies can ultimately be explained by and are reinforced by social norms and societal expectations. It's so important to challenge these norms at work, at home, and in the community. But inspiring role models can also play a powerful role in bringing about the change we want to see for women and girls everywhere. Seeing women in leadership positions across all spheres in all diversity can be really powerful in inspiring young women to similar roles, particularly in areas more traditionally perceived as those dominated by men, such as STEM. I want to offer a couple of reflections from my own leadership journey, which could have turned out really differently had it not been for some key moments within my career and key individuals intervening to support me along the way. I joined the Foreign Ministry as a female with a regional accent at a fairly junior level, and not having been to the schools and universities that many of my colleagues had attended. So on paper, it didn't necessarily look like the most inspiring of starts. But against my and possibly many others' expectations, here I am in a senior ambassador role in our network. What were the key events that have enabled that journey? I think first was I was lucky enough to secure what I call some icon jobs. I describe these as jobs that people identify as having particular agency and visibility within an organisation. I was the first female advisor in the Foreign Minister's Office in the UK, and as such, I acted as a guide for the organisation to his own instincts and what was driving him, and a gateway to information flow and access to him. That's one of those jobs from which people's careers have genuinely taken off, because even though you're at a relatively junior rank, you are really visible, for better or for worse, and you're close to decision making. You can learn from ministers and senior officials alike. But I was only really in the field for the appointment because the then foreign minister rejected an all-male recommendation list that had been handed to him by our central HR function. He demanded a more diverse list, and that was the only reason that I came into the frame. My first major leadership job was where I was leading a team across 2 offices in Vietnam. I was involved in managing tens of people and had a public and influence role. I had to be across strategic planning, people issues, culture, finance, delivery, and learn about myself as a leader at the same time. As a deputy ambassador, rather than being the ambassador, I could have disappeared from view in HQ, but I always tried to find a way to bring attention to what my team and I were doing without feeling like I was showing off. Usually that was by sharing something that we'd developed or some lessons we'd learned that spoke to a wider problem within the organisation. And in doing so, I was supported to the max by my male ambassador. I've been backed with investment in my expertise. I've been taught 3 languages while on full pay by the organisation, and the office has funded 2 masters. I've led crisis management responses and I've survived. And I've been encouraged to apply for roles with sound reasoning on why I'd be good. I've also been encouraged to find my voice, something that was really important. As someone who looked, sounded and expressed myself in a way that was different to the organisational norm, I needed to find my own voice and become comfortable in using it. This is partly about presentation. It was also about confidence, but it was also about believing that I had a right to speak. COVID, I think, is posing an additional problem for us. Over 25 years since the signing of the Beijing Declaration, the landmark UN resolution outlining principles concerning equality for men and women, we've made really great strides. But COVID threatens to halt progress, particularly in the world's developing countries. An estimated 20 million adolescent girls globally may not return to school after the disruption of the last year. The employment drop related to social distancing measures has had a large impact on sectors with high female employment shares, including accommodation, hospitality and food services, retail, wholesale trade, and services such as art and recreation. McKinsey have found that women make up almost 2/5 of the global labour force, but have suffered more than half the total job losses from the crisis so far. Closures of schools and daycare centres have a massively increased childcare needs, which has a particularly large impact on working mothers. We cannot build back better from COVID without focusing on gender equality, the disproportionate care burden that falls on women, and without an emphasis on the empowerment of women and girls. Internationally, the UK is working with partners to ensure gender equality is a central element of the COVID-19 recovery. We'll continue to champion access to 12 years of quality education for every girl in the world. And through our COP presidency, we will be promoting a clean and inclusive and resilient recovery from COVID-19. We want to give a voice to those most affected by climate change, including women and girls. To wrap up, I want to end with 2 quotes, one from a man and one from a woman. The first is from John Maynard Keynes, who's often seen as the father of modern macroeconomics. He said, "It is astonishing what foolish things one can temporarily believe if one thinks too long alone, particularly in economics." The second is from Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, a former finance minister of Nigeria and a fantastic female role model who's recently made history by becoming the first woman and the first African to be selected as Director General of the WTO. Investing in women is smart economics, and investing in girls, catching them upstream, is even smarter economics. And if Ngozi's suggestions are not properly followed, there is a real risk, as Keynes put it, that we collectively in economics and finance and beyond fall into the trap of believing foolish things because we will only be thinking amongst people like us. The onus is on us and our collective action to change the trajectory for women and girls. And if we do so, I have every confidence that in the not too distant future, we'll be having conversations about the mothers of other modern branches of finance and economics too. Some of them already exist in our world, and I really hope that some of them are in our audience today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cara. I do love it when you speak because you tell these fantastic stories. And you know, from what you've just said, I love the idea, funny enough, of the mirror challenge. I normally avoid mirrors, but I like the idea that women can see themselves in these roles. And the idea of visibility is ever so key. And one of the things that I really like that 100 Women in Finance have been doing is having this idea of the next generation of speakers and leaders and showing them, giving them opportunities to platform. I would like to invite people to put their questions in the Q&A. Again, this is going to be an upvoting system. And if there are any questions for Cara, please do insert them now. But if not, I'd like to invite Alex to just share her comments on why we're doing this.
Hi, yeah, back again. So I just wanted to say a few things about 100 Women in Finance and the sobering comments that Cara just said about the statistics. Now, 100 Women in Finance it's our 20th anniversary this year, actually, and we have representation in 26 locations globally, 4 continents, and this year we will be actually launching new locations in Africa, which is very exciting. Our mission is to empower women at every stage of their career, but our vision is to have 30% representation of women in investment roles and executive leadership positions by the year 2040. And obviously we have a long way to go, but just for everybody's benefit, all of our charitable works or all of our philanthropic efforts now go towards changing those demographics and creating initiatives for women so they can achieve their potential and we can collectively get to this goal. One of the things that Cara was talking about, which is incredibly important to us, is this idea of visibility. So without visibility, you cannot really achieve or be known to a network outside your own network. And we all know that there is unconscious bias when people are hiring senior leaders. So to expand your network, you need to be visible, and that will help us to get more women to the executive leadership positions, but it also means that we can inspire the next generation. So we have a number of initiatives, and if you haven't had a look at it already, then please do. We can send further information afterwards, but we have what is called the Fund Women database, where we have a list. So far, it's about 500 women who are portfolio managers or investment analysts who are working at a funds management business, or it can be a female-owned funds management business, because a lot of the time these women get less money from global allocators because they are less visible. And even if you have the best performance in the world, if no one knows who you are, then you're not going to get any money. So we built out this database to help these women get visibility, and to also help them to be able to speak at conferences, events, etc. We're also launching a what's called the Allocator Showcase, which is focusing on women who work in investment roles in allocator firms. So to Cara's point, pension plans, sovereign wealth funds, endowments, family offices, and insurance companies. And again, the more visible these ladies become, the more we will have a multiplier effect and slowly but surely change the industry. Today we very happily have 2 of our next gen committee members who are going to be interviewing their role models, and it's just showcasing how important it is to get on camera and to talk to people and ask questions. Anyway, that's all I really had to say about it. But these initiatives are really important, and we're so grateful for the role models and our interviewees today for getting out there and talking to us.
Thanks, Alex. So I think we've heard a little bit from Cara and from Alex around how we're all helping each other, the standout moments that have helped us take steps that we might not otherwise have been willing to embrace or as readily able to embrace. We thought we'd start off our role models interviews with a quick poll, just to ask people how they feel about role models. What is it that makes somebody a role model for you? And we're going to be asking the same question at the very end of this day, of the session, to see whether any perspectives have shifted. If you would take a moment, perhaps, to look at the words on the screen and see if any of these resonate for you as you think about the role models in your life.
Yeah.
But while we're looking at this, it's actually a bit hard to call. So this is the first time I've seen such an evenly spread poll on Zoom. And I have to admit, I was not very prepared for that. But what I like about it is that the words that are leading, of authenticity, being engaged and in the moment, leader, those are the words that I really feel resonate for me when I think about the two speakers on our first fireside chat. So the two speakers we're about to hear from, in the role of interviewer, is Clarence Singham-Jo, who is the head of international for First Arab Bank and our male champion today. Clarence is an inspiration himself. He has fought very hard for diversity, hands dirty in the moment. As a leader, he has driven diversity in his own organizations. And of course, having mentioned before, the very low statistic of women who have leadership roles in executive boards and the like, we are very privileged to have Kathy Matsui, formerly the vice chair of Goldman Sachs Japan, who has been very hands-on and hands dirty in the industry over the years. I can't think of more authentic leaders to feature for our fireside chat. And if I could invite them to turn on their cameras and unmute themselves so that we can begin the conversation and understand how they feel and experience role models.
Hi, thanks Tamara, and thanks OMFIF and 100 Women in Finance for organizing this event. And Kathy, thank you so much for gracing this event. Let's kick off. We have about 20 minutes, right? Let me ask you, Kathy, how did you get into finance? I was looking through your bio and it said you kind of did social studies and then you went into international relations, and you kind of don't normally immediately connect that with the world of finance, right?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks, Clarence, for moderating this session and for the organizers for pulling this amazing event together. So to your question, how did I get involved in finance? So finance was not at the top of my sort of priority list when I was looking for a job. I had actually attended a graduate program with the intention of entering the United States State Department, the Foreign Service. That was sort of my dream career, so to speak, when I was in college. But as life would have it, these serendipitous turn of events allowed me to come to Japan between college and graduate school as a Rotary Foundation scholar. And I am Japanese American. My parents are first generation immigrants from Japan to the United States. But this was the very first time for me to be in Japan, to visit my relatives. All of my relatives still live here. And that kind of got the wheels turning in my mind, got me more interested in my heritage, about where my family roots had come from. And so I went to graduate school and thinking that maybe something in the Foreign Service related to Japan might be of interest. But then in the summer between my 2 years of grad school, I ended up becoming an intern in Japan at the old, what they called Mitsui Bank, one of the large commercial banks here. I wore the Japanese, female uniform. It was a very bizarre experience coming out of a US university. But that summer, I happened to meet my now husband, who was working in Japan at the time. And so this is not what happens to me often, but I had to go back to grad school for my remaining semester. I finished my last exam. I don't think I even attended graduation. After that last exam was turned in, I got myself on a plane to come back to Japan to be with him. And I had to find a job. And this was the Japanese asset bubble period in 1989. In fact, the last year of that extraordinary period in Japan's economic history. But frankly, if you could walk and talk, you could easily find a job. And my husband at that point was already working in finance. He was working as an economist at a UK investment bank. I thought his job was cool. I thought his colleagues were fun and interesting. So I thought, hey, I could do that too. And hence, that's what led me to find a role in finance. Although for myself, I know many others on this webinar have different roles, but for myself, the only role that I was interested in pursuing within, say, a securities firm or investment bank was investment research. And within research, you know, there's macro, there's micro research. I was only interested in macro research. And so I ended up working as a junior to a senior strategist who looks at the overall Japanese stock market. And then eventually I got promoted to that senior role myself. So a long and unpredicted serendipitous path led me to this industry.
I really love what there was something you said, you know, in when you were describing this journey, and I really love what you just said. You said, hey, I could do that too. You know, and I'm wondering how much that, hey, I could do that too has been important in your life in finance.
Yes, I think that at the end of the day, whatever any of us chooses to pursue in our lives, I think that kind of spark of interest, this is something I'm interested in, I'm curious about, and hey, there's somebody who is doing that already, whom I respect or I admire, and they have maybe a similar background to me. I think I could do that too. I'm not yet experienced enough. Then I was interested in Kara's comments earlier when I started my job back in 1990, and this was the absolute apex of Japan's bubble. So kind of my first year, the Nikkei index fell 40%. It was just tears and anxiety amongst my clients and my colleagues. But not only was I young, inexperienced, I was female in a male-dominated sector, and I was foreign. I'm an American citizen. I'm not, you know, Japanese national. So I called it my 3 strikes against me. I was very humbled in the beginning. I stumbled a lot. I had to get a lot of, you know, coaching from my colleagues, frankly. But I'm very lucky in that I had this sort of support network to pick me up by my bootstraps and say, that's not the right thing you should be doing. You should be doing this, right? And that's really what I think I truly benefited from.
You know, when I look at my own life, I realize that, you know, I mean, well, there's a part of me that thinks, oh, I did it and I'm where I am because of what I am. But then I, you know, if I sit on pause a bit, I realize that actually there have been very, very key people along my journey, you know. And then you mentioned humility, and you mentioned people who've come and said to you, hey, no go, right? Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a bit about some of the people you think who are really key influences in your life in finance that have, mm-hmm. you know, kind of had a significant impact on you?
Yeah, so lots of people, and one of my top recommendations to anybody in finance, men or women, is to create a personal BOD, a personal board of directors. I have just kind of not randomly, but purposefully selected a group of people for my entire lifespan, from when I went to high school, to my graduate school colleagues, to my work colleagues, to my friends at church. You know, that know the holistic 360-degree Kathy Matsui, as opposed to a narrow 2-dimensional, you know, Kathy in another context. And in this personal BOD I formed for myself, which is really, the purpose is to help me in points in my life that I need advice. And so when I was a young mother, I had no relatives around me when I had my children here in Japan. I had no clue what to do with the baby, especially when they got sick, right? So I had some wonderful mommy friends who would help me on that angle. Or if I reached a crossroad in my career, which direction should I go, left or right, left or right? These are people that I could draw advice from, and they were my sounding board. So one person I would say in particular, throughout my entire career at Goldman in particular and beyond, is a gentleman named Mark Schwartz. He was the former chairman of Goldman Sachs Asia. He, from really the early days of my career at Goldman back in 1994, he was heading the Tokyo office before he took on the whole regional role. But he was really a very helpful person in that he instilled confidence where I didn't have enough. I think, especially for a lot of us women, there's this confidence gap that many people talk about. You may be doing a great job, you may have achieved something tremendous, but you always think you're inferior or just not good enough, say for a particular role or particular promotion opportunity. And he was somebody in my life who really said, look, you are of, managing director quality, or you are of Goldman Sachs partner quality, and these are the reasons why. And if there are areas that I need to develop, he was also very, very straightforward and blunt with me about what I needed to work on. So I think those types of people in my life really helped me, not just, help me understand what I needed to work on, but also help me, for example, in a large organization. The word came up in an earlier comment, visibility. I'm here working in Tokyo, kind of a satellite office of Goldman Sachs, where the mothership is New York City. I think a lot of us, particularly here in Asia, can appreciate this point, is how do you make yourself visible, right? What are things that you should be doing about this? And so I think particularly for women, if you've done something that is awesome, but you're the only one who knows about it, well, what good is that? So enlisting the support of, for example, in my case, Mark Schwartz or other senior people who looked after me as not just mentors, but sponsors, really were tremendously helpful in the journey of my career. And to this day, he remains my life mentor, and we're friends not just professionally but also personally.
Thanks, Kathy. That answers one of the questions that actually just came out on the Q&A section. I was reading something of about a year ago, and it was something that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late late justice on the Supreme Court, and she was asked, how many women do you think it's necessary to have on the Supreme Court of nine justices before you think there's gender equality? And her answer was 9.
That's right.
That she mentioned a full bench of women, and it really struck me that I've never thought about it that way. I don't have a problem thinking of 9 men on the Supreme Court, but the idea of 9 women was, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that. And I was just wondering, if you had what would a financial institution where basically the whole senior management were women, do you think there would be any difference than the way the financial institution is being run?
Well, yeah, it's difficult to say, and everybody individually is different, obviously. But I think there are enough studies, be it anthropological, sociological studies out there that do identify, I guess, certain characteristics of female versus male leadership qualities. So, for instance, I think. And again, there are many views, but some of the things I've read, for instance, are women have what they call, things like very strong communication skills, number 1. These are 4 C's, by the way. The second C is compassion. The third C is critical thinking. And the fourth C is creativity. And I'm by no means suggesting that men don't have any of these characteristics. Of course, we all have these characteristics, but when you just do sort of empirical studies, men, on the other hand, are very good at taking risks, or if they've identified a goal, they're very laser focused on reaching that goal. They're quite aggressive, powerful, all these adjectives. So I'm just saying, I think that for women, if this is true, that they tend to exhibit some of these 4 C characteristics that I've just described, that can lead to, for instance, better or more thoughtful risk management, critical thinking. They're questioning, why are we doing things this way? Is there another way? Seeking the advice of experts. I think women maybe tend to be a little bit more humble and saying, I don't know, I'm not an expert in this field. Say with corona management, for instance, we've seen some examples of countries led by women who happen to have managed their corona crises better than, say, others. Is that a total coincidence or not? So I think that's one thing. And I think second is the creativity angle, right? The world is full of very different perspectives and views. And if you have a certain gender, whose lens through which you're determining, let's say, product development or business strategies or whatever, or policy making in the government sphere, you are going to have a rather lopsided view of the world, aren't you? Right? Whereas if you incorporate different perspectives and perhaps more creative thinking in terms of the other half of the population, that must result in a richer society altogether. And frankly, I think for this next world or age that we're moving very rapidly in, which is digitally driven, right? Where transformation of the way we work, the way we live, the way we go to school is going to be revolutionized, frankly, perhaps in all of our lifetimes. We need those 4C female leadership traits, I think, to help us cope and help us thrive in that next era. So I'm very passionate of the point that I think women with those 4C leadership traits or characteristics are actually perhaps even better prepared or equipped with this new age that we're all entering very quickly than perhaps men. But again, we all need to work together because we need everybody's unique skills and traits to thrive.
And I was just something someone said about you that really struck me. I was wondering whether it's okay to ask a question about the Asian Women's University which you were involved in. And so I wrote to a friend of mine who was one of the founding faculty and said, look, is it okay? I'm going to be interviewing Kathy in a few minutes. Is it okay to ask her a question about this? And she said to me, yes, it's okay. But she also said something else. She said, she's a good person.
Thank goodness.
And
that person said something different.
That's a real compliment, right? You don't normally think about finance and say she's a good person or he's a good person. And how important is it to be a good person in finance?
Yeah.
So and what does being good a good person mean?
Exactly. What does that mean? What does that mean? And so, for me, my career, like I said, was, I was so blessed with tremendous support all around me. But one of the reasons why I started to, or I decided to support this very unique initiative called the Asian University for Women, which is the first and only liberal arts higher education institution for women in Asia, specifically targeting women in sort of more marginalized communities, parts of Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, and really reaching deep, for example, into communities such as Rohingya refugees, garment factory workers, and the like. One of the reasons I decided to do this, and I spent a lot of my free time on this initiative, is because when I was 36, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I just had my second child, had just been promoted to become the partner of Goldman Sachs Japan. I'd ranked #1 in my category of Japanese strategy in these so-called rankings. I was on the top of the world, in other words. And then the next year I was dumped with this diagnosis, which I totally denied in the beginning. But having gone through 8 months of treatment and recovery and returning to work, I decided that, I've survived, and only with the help of amazing support through my friends and family. I am also Christian, by the way, and I believe that perhaps I survived because God wanted me to be a survivor and to be an instrument of good. And before my diagnosis, frankly, I thought, I'll work till I'm 65, 70, I'll retire, and then I'll do something to give back to society. But because, I don't want to sound morbid, but I was faced with my mortality at a very young age, I didn't know how much longer I would have to live. And while I was healthy and I was energetic and I was so passionate about women's education because it drives empowerment, I thought AUW was the perfect fit for me. And so that's sort of what led me to this incredible institution. We have graduated over 2,000 amazing change makers who are now sprinkled throughout the planet, and they're also creating tremendous good in their communities.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for that personal sharing. Because I was reading this in your bio, and I wasn't sure whether to raise it, and you brought it. Thanks so much for that. We have about 3 minutes more. Let me just ask you, if there are a few things that you want to tell the men and the women, I mean the women and the men actually, who are listening in and watching us, what would you say to them?
Well, one piece of advice, if I could give it, is that I think in finance, one of the reasons I pursued my career and stuck with what I did for 30 years, which was research, was because my performance was measured quite objectively and transparently. And I've mentored a lot of women throughout my career, and not just finance, by the way, in other industries as well. And I think for everybody, doesn't matter what your gender is, but at the end of the day, you're putting in, presumably, whatever you're passionate about at work, a lot of hours, a lot of energy, you're making a lot of sacrifices. You absolutely need to make sure that what you're doing every single day is being evaluated effectively and clearly, so that every day you're expending energy efficiently, not wastefully. And I think particularly for women, because the fact of life is we have these life events that tug at our professional lives. There's always this sort of tug of war going on. And we need to assure ourselves that what we're doing every single day is actually working towards a specific goal. The second piece of advice I think I would have for women goes back to my earlier comments on confidence. I think that women, and this is just because I've managed teams throughout my career, men and women, is that women, again, tend to lack that confidence. And they don't oftentimes ask about promotion. They oftentimes don't negotiate their compensation. But I can tell you right now, men do it all the time, and they do it very well. It's so natural for them. And so if that is the reality of your respective work environments, understand that reality. And I'm not saying play politics, but educate your senior, supervisors or their, supervisors beyond them about how great you are. And like I said, if you're the only one who knows what an amazing, achievement you've just done, that's not going to, be worth, frankly, much unless you tell other people. So don't be afraid to educate. It's not politics and self-promotion. It's educating others about your capabilities. And if you think, she's doing that, I can do that too, just like what Kara explained, figure out what it takes to get to that goal. And it's totally reachable, totally realistic, and you will do it.
Thanks very much, Kathy. I would have loved to have delved a little bit more, for example, into the womenomics work that you've done. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but please do. I mean, that's really groundbreaking work. If you're hearing this, please go and look it up on the net. And Goldman Sachs just came up with a report saying 20 years on, where are we? And it'll be a great read. Thanks so much, Kathy.
Thank you, Clarence.
Thank you, Kathy and Clarence, for this really, really quite insightful session. I have to admit, things like the board of directors, I've always believed in having one, but I'd never thought about the idea of your board of directors for your 360 self. And there's so much juice in there. I'm sort of processing still. Thank you both very much for giving us your time. I don't want to take up, because I'd like to introduce our next fireside chat, where we have a next gen leader. So Natalia Sesterikova, who is currently the head of distribution, business planning and performance at Prudential, will be interviewing Yumiko Murakami, who is the head of the Tokyo Center for the OECD. If I could invite you both to turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves and delve into what I'm sure will be a very rich conversation. The Q&A is still open for anyone who wishes to pose questions, and our interviewees and interviewers are on hand to respond to those. Natalia, over to you.
Thank you, Tamara, and good morning, everybody, and good morning, Yumiko. It's a pleasure to be able to interview you. Maybe to start off, Cara in her introductory speech mentioned moving mountains. Could you describe the toughest mountain you had to move professionally? What is that story of a challenge you faced and you overcame that you're really proud of?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for this opportunity to be able to speak for this event. It's hard to single out perhaps one challenge. There have been a number of difficult situations. At the same time, there have been a number of very encouraging situations throughout my career. But perhaps if I were to mention a few situations where I had a really difficulty, but eventually I overcame the problems that I was facing. One of them was to switch sector completely. So what I did in the past was to start off my first career, my first job out of university or graduate school in my case, was to work for international organization. I worked for the United Nations, so that was a public sector. And then after that, my second job was finance. I actually started to work for Goldman Sachs exactly the same time with Kathy Matsui. We just had Kathy before me. She and I worked together for a long time, for 16 years together. So that was a pretty big change in terms of the nature of the business, the nature of the industry that I was in. And after almost 20 years, I switched again, this time back to the public sector. I joined OECD about 8 years ago. So it was sort of interesting how I started off with the public sector, went to the private sector in the finance industry and back to the public sector. And it was not easy to switch sectors or industry completely. But what I have realized is that whatever you do, whether you are in finance or whether you are with a government organization, in my case, international organization, what you really need to really do is to understand what your competitive advantage is, how you are adding value to the team that you're working with, to the organization you're working with, to the stakeholders that you're working with. And oftentimes you may think, oh, because you were working in, in my case, finance, what are you doing here, as international organization diplomat, and vice versa, which I think is a very typical reaction that I used to get. I'm still getting sometimes, but I think what's important is for you to, first of all, understand, for you, in my case, for me, to understand how you are different from other people, and that difference can be actually your competitive advantage, and make sure that you use that to your actual advantage, to make sure that you are different from other people. And that's why you should be hiring me, because I bring something to the table which is completely different from 99% of your organization staff. And that's what you need to understand for yourself first. So of course, it was not easy for me to do it in the beginning, but I learned to realize, hey, that's maybe my edge. Maybe that's how I can be different, and I can be different, and therefore I can add value. So I would say that if there are people in the audience today who may not have a typical background versus your colleagues, you actually have to start thinking, okay, maybe that can be a competitive advantage. Maybe that can be a strength. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Yumiko. I can very much relate to this because I also went from private equity to the public sector, then back to the private sector. So it's, I could definitely see the difference of approach. And that's why one of the questions I set for you was also, when you changed to OECD, you're in a leadership position. Have you changed the leadership style? Have you changed the approach to creating that impact, or to that difference that you wanted to make?
Well, thank you for that question. I don't really think the fundamental leadership style of mine has changed all that much. What I think has changed is my understanding in terms of the perception of myself by the people that I'm working with. So I think the perception typically in the OECD environment or internationalization is that because I come from the financial background, because I'm one of a very, very few extremely rare case in this organization to have somebody from Goldman Sachs or investment banking in general. So the perception might have been a little bit more of sort of quote unquote aggressive type in their eyes. I think that's well, people have told me, oh my God, you're coming from Wall Street, you're coming from Goldman Sachs, you're coming from uber competitive financial world, and you must be very, very competitive, you must be very, very aggressive. That, I mean, not in those words, but basically that's the sort of perception, or that's the first impression that people might have of me. So even though, as I said, I don't think I had to change or have changed the fundamental leadership style of mine, I think I had to be more aware of the perception or the first impression that people would have of me just because of my background. So I might have been a little bit more careful in terms of how I would present myself, especially in the first meeting or two, to make sure that I don't come across as too aggressive in some way. So that's what I had to do. But as I said before, I don't think the fundamental leadership has changed. Leadership style has changed, and I think I would perceive myself. I would see myself as somebody who would be probably more of a sort of a leader who would be more open to embrace different ideas. I don't think I personally do not think of me as a very charismatic, very kind of strong, aggressive, hey, follow me type of leader. There are people who are extremely strong leaders who would just raise their arm and say, hey, just follow me. I don't see myself as that type of leader. I would see myself as somebody who would be probably working more closely on the ground level with my colleagues and with my team members. And I think that that style, I don't think that has changed, whether I work for OECD or whether I work for an investment bank. But as I said, the perception of me would be very different in the environment that I am working today versus say 10 years ago when I was in finance. So that's something that I would be aware of.
Thank you. Speaking of working on the ground, one of the things that struck me when I was reading your bio was that you have actually worked for the UN peacekeeping operations in Cambodia. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that? And also, in that environment, challenge, so we speak about challenges today, challenge is defined at a different level. What was a key lesson learned that you took away from that experience?
Yes, it was a very humbling experience. I was very young. I think I was 24 or something like that. I was born and raised in Japan. And until I worked in Cambodia, and at the time, in these early 1990s, Cambodia was coming out of the civil war. As you remember, it was one of the worst mass killings that any countries have experienced, and the country was just coming out of the civil war. So the situation was extremely difficult. I have never seen anybody dying before in my life, except for my grandfather when he died. And it was a situation where I would face death on a regular basis. So it was very difficult, emotionally very difficult, very humbling. And I realized how lucky I was. I realized I was not aware of the reality of the world until I went to Cambodia. In some countries and some regions of the world was just something that I could have never imagined living in Japan. So lesson number one, start counting your blessings. You say this, it's such a cliche, but I just took it for granted. I took for granted for a lot of things I had in my life, whether it's my health or just a simple meal, something that I could have on my dining table to eat. So a lot of the things that I would just take for granted in Japan, growing up in Japan, All these things were not something that people would have in Cambodia. So as I said, number one lesson, start counting your blessings. That was a very, very important lesson for me. I was very fortunate to be able to experience that at the young age, because that just lesson or message, I just have kept it, throughout my life.
That's I think it very much resonates also with what Kathy was just speaking about, right? Without making impact beyond your immediate environment, but your immediate circle. I know that you wrote a book which you called Turning Demographic Challenges into Economic Opportunities. What is your view on our current work? We work remotely, right? So it's a new world for a lot of women. I think career growth has become a different game. What do you think is the key challenge now that we are facing? We have a related question also from the audience that is interested in what are the best ways then for enhancing visibility in the career path for women nowadays in this environment. What are your views on that?
Yeah, so starting off with the book I mentioned, I wrote it a couple years ago. So you probably know Japan is the most advanced aging society. I don't know if it sounds good or bad, I don't know. But anyway, so Japan is facing this humongous demographic tsunami. We have 127 million people living in this country today. That number, 127, is going to drop below 100 by 2050 or somewhere around there. That's a very rapid pace in terms of how quickly we're shrinking. The reality is, yes, Japan is aging quickly, but this demographic tsunami that we're facing today in Japan is something that a lot of other countries are going to be facing at different times in the future, but relatively soon. So, if you look at China, the same thing. If you look at Singapore, same situation. Again, slightly different versus Japan, just because timing is different. But in terms of how demographic challenge is going to be changing the basic social structure, basic economic structure in those countries, that's going to be the case for many countries in Asia, Europe, and the US. So it's going to be a global trend. In my book, I argue that because Japan is facing this demographic tsunami first in the country, in the world, this is going to give Japan a competitive advantage, because what we can actually do with this humongous demographic challenge in Japan, whether it's the innovative products or services that would, address emerging needs from the silver economy. That's what we call the silver economy that's growing out of the demographic change, or policies, economic policies, social policies, which we need to really think about in the context of demographic change. These are the things Japan is doing right now, 2021, March 8th, this is what we're doing today. Just think about what these new ideas and products and services and policies, what they can do in other parts of the world. It's incredible, right? Because if you think about the fact that this is going to be a global trend in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and Japan is actually doing today, this should give Japan tremendous opportunities in terms of economic potentials, business potentials, but in general, what they can do, Japan can do in an international society, perhaps by sharing best practices on the economic social policy discussion front. There's so many things Japan could do to contribute to the international community. But anyway, so the book is all about opportunities. Of course, there are a lot of risks, but we are trying to look at the situation and say, hey, what is the bright, what is a bright spot you can see in this very dark situation? Oh, there's this one, there's that one, there's just so many different situations. Just in that context, where does gender come in terms of this demographic challenge that we have today? First of all, very simply, Japan has 50% of population women, like any other countries. So when the population is shrinking very rapidly, what we need to think about is, okay, how can we maximize our talent pool, our population? And it's very, very clear. It's a low hanging fruit, right? When you have shrinking labor market, labor force. Oh, we have 50% of population that are women who are very well educated. So that's what Japan has done in the last, especially last several months. The administration under Prime Minister Abe, former Prime Minister, said womenomics is the way to go. If you remember the last talk with Kathy, she has been arguing womenomics is the way to go for a long time, for 30 years. Japan has really taken up that idea 6-7 years ago and said, okay, we're going to focus on womenomics. We're going to encourage women to work because we're shrinking. They have done a good job. However, if you look at the female labor market participation rate, it has improved quite a bit. However, the problem is these women who are working more today versus say 10 years ago, they're not getting paid in the same way as men. The income gap between men and women in Japan is one of the largest among the OECD countries, is 26%. So that's huge. So even though more and more women are working, they are not getting the same level of opportunity, same level of compensation, which explains 26% of income gap. And that is a very critical issue to address.
Thanks, Yumiko. I think in terms of the challenges, obviously everybody is looking at COVID now, right? So 2020 was a year that we saw that policy areas are intertwined so much stronger than we thought. And at OECD, you do see the big picture, right? You see the economic development, you see public health management challenges, you see education challenges. In these couple of minutes that we have left for our chat, could you tell us, what do you think are the key topics for the future that we all have to think about in this new world? What is it that we really need to be mindful of, the big thing?
The big thing here is we have to make sure that we're going back to the world that we were before. When we are trying to rebuild the economy, when we are trying to rebuild society, this is exactly what we're doing as we go through this pandemic. We need to make sure the world that we're going back to is going to be better than the one we left behind. And in that, you can argue the environmental consideration, green recovery, that's one. Also, equally important is how inclusive we are going to be in the social environment, economic environment. And in that argument, when you talk about that, it's very, very important that women are included in every aspect of the decision-making process. I think it was actually interesting to see, as mentioned, Kathy mentioned, how countries dealt with the coronavirus pandemic in different ways. And there are some countries who have done really well, and those countries actually have female leadership. Not all of them, but some of them do. I think it just goes to show you how important it is to have diversity in the decision-making process, because when you have a situation like coronavirus, okay, COVID, you just don't have a clear answer. You don't know what to do because we've never experienced this before. So when you have a situation like that, what's the best solution? You have to have as many different ideas, as many different thoughts as possible at the table when you are discussing different solutions. If you have only one type of person, guess what? You're going to have one type of solution. When you have 10 types of people, guess what? You're going to have potentially 10 types of solutions. And that's what these countries have done. And I think it's important when you rebuild the world after the coronavirus pandemic, we are going to have a situation where we have a very inclusive decision-making process where you have as many possibilities as possible in terms of different train of thought.
Thanks, Yumiko. Thanks. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for the insights. I'll hand it over to Tamara for the next fireside chat.
Thank you very much, Natalia and Yumiko. That was really insightful. And I have to say, all these years that I've been able and privileged to speak to Yumiko and hear from her, I'm always struck by the incredible positivity of those conversations. And this idea that, the differences and challenges that we face and the things that make us sometimes potentially feel a little bit nervous can also be our competitive advantage or our edge, and also bring opportunities to us. So in our next fireside chat, we're going to be hearing a great deal about opportunities and turning the moment for yourself. Coming up next, we have Dina Chauhan, who is the Director for Managed Investment Solutions at HSBC, who will be interviewing Chen Fangfang, the Asia Pacific Chairwoman and Asia Pacific Head of Asset Servicing and Digital at BNY Mellon. If I could hand over to Dina and Fangfang, can you please turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves?
Hi, Tamara. Thank you, and good morning for everyone joining us. Thank you very much, Fan Fang, for sharing your insights this morning. From reading your bio, we've seen that you pivoted from finance to the tech field. Can you talk a little bit about why you made this move? What was your motivation, and what were some of your strongest assumptions about the tech industry, and which of those turned out to be completely wrong?
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Dina. Look, moving from finance to technology, to me, it was a fairly natural move. I've always been interested in the intersection between technology and finance. In fact, a lot of financial organizations will be arguing, over the years, they've invested billions of dollars into technology because they view the technology as the enabler for financial advancement and so on and so forth. Now, for me, even in my old job, I was quite active mentoring, providing mentoring internally, externally, and interacting with the startup and then fintech community. So when the opportunity presented itself, I had an opportunity to meet the founder of Algorand, which is a public blockchain startup founded by a MIT professor. So we spent. It's a very interesting encounter. He's very busy. I was very busy. We ended up talking for about an hour and a half on his car ride from Wuzhen to Shanghai airport. That's the only time we're able to talk. And I was really impressed by his vision, where he believed the technology, in this case, is blockchain technology, can transform and democratize financial industries. So for me, I just feel I felt I have to take on this opportunity. I spent 20 plus years in the financial industry. I've built up the managerial experience, but now I really want to build on this practical experience in the fintech, and I'm making an impact. And frankly, I felt there was nothing to lose. From my point of view, I always believe one's marketability is driven by how much value they can bring to the table. Mm-hmm. Now, building on the financial industry and then now building on this, fintech startup experience, I felt that's an enrichment opportunity for me. And I wasn't really think about, whether I'm going to lose the job and so on and so forth. So I just felt I had to take on the opportunity. And looking back for the last 2 years, there's absolutely no regret. So Dina, let me come to the second part of your question in terms of assumptions about tech industry and whether that turned out to be true or not. I guess, frankly, I didn't have much of a preconceived ideas about the tech industry. When I joined Algorand, I did have a question more for myself, which is, coming from a non-tech background. I was an economic major and I have spent most of my career in the financial services industries, right? So coming from a non-tech background, can I work effectively in a fintech startup? Can I make meaningful contribution to the company that we were building? That was my biggest question. Looking back, I guess, while I still can't write codes, I can't provide insights in debating technical merits of a certain design, which frankly wasn't my job. We have a technical team to focus on that. I realized that as long as you're willing to learn, you can get to a level where you can have a meaningful conversation with, whether it's a developer, whether it's a startup entrepreneur, or whether it's a partner that you're building a alliance with. So I actually built strong mutual respect with our research team. These are the among the best cryptography researchers. So when they talk about encryptions, I had no idea what they're talking about. But by working together, each bring its own value to the table. We've built mutual respect. We recognize, each brings something valuable, constructive to the table in building a company. But I also realized, the past experience come in handy, when I negotiate a deal with a party, when I convince a partner to work with Algorand, institute a process. You realize a startup company actually didn't have much of a process. So I had to start building the basic process and policies to manage our efforts and formulating a strategy for ecosystem building, which is one of my primary job at Algorand. So I guess a long-winded way of saying that, it's there is, yes, a technical element that, someone like me without a technical background, you need to come up to speed. But then again, it's no different than in other industry where you have to solve problems. You have to build a pathway to get closer to your vision.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because you've lived and worked and grown up in many different countries, the US, Hong Kong, China, and now you've worked in 2 different fields. This is extremely rewarding and enriching, as you said in your own words. But there are challenges of reinventing yourself that you just touched upon. You didn't know anything about encryption. Can you talk a little bit more about how you overcame some of those challenges, about reinventing yourself and making sure that you were able to add value and when you had a seat at a table, make an effective contribution?
I've been taking on different organization, a respectful global financial organization. I sort of took on a new role once every 2-3 years. That kept my experience fresh. So I really enjoyed taking on new challenges, but never thought about as a challenge, or never think about in the framework of self-reinvention. Maybe before I answer your question, I wanted to get to one of the best advice I've learned for my career. I shared this with some of our staff before. Jim Collins, who's the management guru who wrote the book Good to Great, many years ago when he was contemplating leaving his Stanford professorship position to start up his own management consulting organization, he was anxious. So he went to talk to Peter Drucker, who was yet another management guru, right? And at the end of the conversation, Peter Drucker said to Jim, he said, "You're worried about whether you're going to be surviving. I think you will probably survive. You're also wondering, you're anxious about whether you're going to be successful, but that's the wrong question. The right question is whether you're going to be useful." And that was very insightful for me, and I have been using it for my career, is not really focusing on self-reinvention or think about the challenge. It's really just put myself in there and learn as much as possible and figure out a way to bring value, be useful. I think that sort of take the pressure off to a lot degree, because you're not really constantly worrying, am I successful? Am I doing one thing right? Am I doing the next thing right? You're really thinking about how can I leverage my skill sets, my experience to bring value to the role I'm in, to the organization I'm working for. So yes, there were a lot of challenges. There were pains along the way. I sort of view it as the necessary evil to get from a not knowing much, constantly on my toe, to get to a stage where I feel I know what am I doing. I know I'm bringing value to the organization, and that journey is extremely rewarding. I become more conscious in the later years, in the recent years, to be mindful of, yes, I recognize I'm in pain. I recognize I'm in a tough spot, but hunker down, I know there's light at the end of the tunnel and I will get there. So focus one day at a time. So that's how I sort of get through challenges, especially for the last 2 years working at Algorand. It is a fast moving, very fast moving industry. There's not a lot of models or successful models to take reference to. You sort of have to figure out a way to, to get to your vision. So I think that mentality helps.
Yeah, and further to that point, you've mentioned that working at Algorand, there wasn't many role models, and you have to look within and you have to look wide and think about what value and how useful you are to bringing what you're bringing to the table. In terms of some of the colleagues that you've worked with in some of the industries that you've worked with, how have you sort of really challenged the status quo? Because you may have been the only female in the room. You've also moved industries. You're maybe someone that has the least technical knowledge. How did you navigate that? And how did you embrace that to use that to your advantage rather than it being a disadvantage?
I would say I would always tell people I'm soft-spoken. I'm Asian, right? I don't have a loud voice, but I would always tell people I'm soft-spoken, but I'm not shy. I want to set the stage right. Secondly, I every time I take on a new job or new industry, I recognize I may not understand it very well. So I actually try in the early days, try to learn, humble myself, even, for the, when I was at Algorand, I have 20 years financial service experience, but coming to this place, I know nothing about public blockchain. And I didn't know much about community building. So I learned, I asked people, I talk to people, whoever who wants to talk to me. Many are half of my age, but they are more, blockchain and a crypto native. There's always something I could learn. And I guess, ultimately, bringing, I always focus on bringing value to the table. I think that's the way to build trust and build your own brand, and not really focus my energy on, how do people think about me? Is that because I'm a woman? Is that because of my Asian? Is that because I don't have the industry? I feel as long as you bring value, you ask questions. Sometimes I ask some very basic questions, and I got feedback, people saying, thank you for asking that basic question, because we realize most people don't have the answer, right? Mm-hmm. So just don't be shy, and don't try to pretend you know everything, and just be pretty frank about, I don't understand this. Can you explain to me? I think that helps.
Okay. And having worked in many different countries and different environments, you've seen gender equality, across both in the Eastern world and also in the Western world. How is the gender conversation from your perspective? What are the more effective movements and policies that you've seen that have worked, across your different environments that you've worked in? Can you share a little bit more? Because I think it would be really interesting to hear your insights, given that you've seen different things at play.
Yeah, I'm a glass half full person, and I would like to think that there tangible progress that's been made. I've seen the momentum of of building gender equality. I was doing some research last year, 2020. 37 out of the Fortune 500 company are run by a female CEO. That's actually tremendous progress. But then again, the sobering fact is 37 out of 500. So there's still a long way to go, right? How do we get 37 to 50 to 100 or even 300? So I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. Coming back to your question, I truly believe you have to have a combination of grassroots movement and the top-down changes. I'm a supporter. I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm a supporter of quota. And the reason I support quota, 30% club, is that, everybody as human being, we all come with unconscious bias. And we have our blind spots. Everybody has blind spots. It's not just men. Women have our blind spots too. Unless you change the dynamic, the mix at the top and the dynamic at the top, you can never institute a truly inclusive, workplace. And that the process can never be, you have to start with some more change on the top, then the process can become more organic and natural. So I think that's very crucial in the early days to drive the gender diversity and gender inclusiveness.
And have you personally noticed mindset changes, in China and Hong Kong, and also in the US? That same level of progress is being made, or do you still notice there's actually big gaps on either side?
There's still a lot more that need to be done. That's for sure. But as I said, I also recognize progress made. I think we do need to. Yes, we need to practice the mindset, but we need to celebrate the success. Let's don't forget all the efforts and the progress that's been made. Recognizing there are a lot more work that need to be done. I think it's, me in my position, I have an obligation. It's my passion, it's my responsibility, but also I believe it's an obligation of my role to really practice inclusive mindset, right? Encouraging and celebrating the accomplishment of diverse workforce.
Yep.
It's gender in this. We're celebrating International Women's Day today, but also people of color and different background orientations. I think the tone from the top is so crucial to drive the cultural change. And as a result, absolutely, I personally have to be conscious to practice that inclusive mindset myself, and hope that will trickle down across the organization.
Yeah, and in the last sort of minute that we have left, I wanted to do a couple of quick fire questions, which are one word answers from you.
Sure.
Who is your role model and why? Very quickly.
It's my father. A man. He's a self-taught, a smart engineer. He joined the army when he was 11 years old, never studied, and then he was sent to college, and he turned out to be a brilliant engineer. And 20 years ago, when he was 63, he said, "I have two dreams. I want to make sure the data can transport on all the electric poles that you see here, and then something else I don't understand what he was talking about, but he inspired me. He still worked for the last 20 years. So he's my role model."
Okay. And what's the most influential book that you've read?
Well, I'm a Christian. I have to say the Bible.
Okay. What's your favorite holiday destination?
One of my favorite place I visited is Zanzibar of Tanzania. It's heaven.
What's your favorite form of self-care?
I like jogging. It helps clear my mind and strengthen my body.
Okay, and then the final question is, and I know you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but what's the best piece of advice you've been given in your career or life, actually?
Focus on being useful. Focus on being useful. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Fang Fang.
Thank you, Dina.
We're going to close with a reiteration of the poll we did at the start to see whether any opinions have shifted while we've been doing this session. While we're filling out the poll, I'd like to thank everyone so much for participating, staying through the hour and a half. I know it's a Monday morning and it's a bit tricky. Plus, there's so much on today. Women's Day is fantastic for putting out so much content. As Alex said, one of the reasons why we're doing this is so that we hope to do things together, show solidarity, and drive the changes we hope will benefit all of us, men and women across the globe. As part of that, there will be a platform that brings all of the content we can gather together. That'll be freely available to anyone, and details will follow. Also to follow, we'll have a survey where we will make available the gender balance index that OMFIF is putting out today. Thank you all so much for giving us this time. We are almost 3 minutes over, 10 seconds to go on the poll. And we have had a change. So we started this day with leader being the winner in the poll results. And I think what we've heard today is that you don't always need a position of leadership to become a role model or be a leader. And now we've seen the increase in the engaged section, where I think this idea of really living it, being it, focusing on the value you bring has come out today. Thank you all so much for attending. I think we're 3 minutes over time, so I'm going to close the session today. Thank you all so much, and thank you 100 Women and our speakers for doing this together.